Hurry up!
May 1941. The skies above the island of Crete were raining men. Thousands of elite German paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, launched the first major invasion in history entirely from the air.
The landings! Now!
It was meant to be their crowning achievement. Instead, it became their graveyard. This is the story of Operation Mercury, the battle so brutal, it convinced Hitler to abandon his most terrifying weapon forever. By May 1941, the Nazi war machine seemed unstoppable. It had just swept through Yugoslavia and Greece. The British Expeditionary Force, shattered, had fled the continent in a chaotic retreat. Their last refuge in the Mediterranean was the island of Crete. To the British, Crete was a fortress. To Hitler, it was an enemy unsinkable aircraft carrier, threatening his southern flank and the vital Romanian oil fields. He had to take it. But there was a problem. The British Royal Navy owned the sea. Any invasion by ship was suicide. And the German High Command, the OKW, knew it. So, they turned to a man with a radical idea, General Kurt Student. He was the father of Germany's paratroops, the Fallschirmjäger. These were the elite of the elite. The men who had cracked open the fortress of Ebenemeel in Belgium with just gliders. Kurt Student proposed a plan so audacious it bordered on insanity to capture Crete entirely from the air. It had never been done in military history. They called it Operation Mercury. The German plan centered on 3 points: the airfields at Maleme, Rethymno, and Heraklion. They had no tanks. They had no heavy artillery. The plan was to drop thousands of Fallschirmjäger and glider-borne mountain troops, Gebirgsjäger, directly onto these airfields. They had to capture at least one airfield intact. On the first day, once an airfield was secure, a massive air bridge of hundreds of Junkers,
Los, los, los! Schnell, schnell!
Ju-52 transport planes would land, bringing in the reinforcements, the cannons, and everything needed to conquer the island. If they failed to take an airfield, the entire airborne force would be trapped and annihilated. There was no plan B. What the Germans didn't know, the British, thanks to their cracking of the Enigma code, knew the entire plan General Bernard Freyberg, commanding the Allied forces, British, Australian, New Zealand, and Greek troops, had positioned his most battle-hardened men exactly at those airfields. And they were waiting. On the dawn of May 20th, 1941, the invasion began. It was a sight the world had never seen. The sky over Crete turned black with aircraft. hundreds of Stuka dive bombers and Messerschmitt fighters swept over the Allied positions, trying to pin them down. And then they came hundreds of slow-moving Ju-52s, towing silent DFS-230 gliders. And then the parachutes. Thousands. Then tens of thousands of canopies blossoming against the blue sky. But for the German paratroopers, that moment of glory instantly became hell. They were victims of a fatal flaw in German doctrine. The paratroopers jumped with only their personal weapons, a pistol and grenades. Their rifles, submachine guns, and machine guns were dropped separately in weapons canisters. They were jumping virtually unarmed directly into the gun sights of the waiting New Zealanders and Australians. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Germany's elite paratroopers were shot out of the sky while they hung helplessly in their harnesses. Those who survived the landing were armed only with pistols, crawling desperately through olive groves, trying to find their weapons canisters, while Allied Vickers and Bren machine guns tore them apart. At Rethymno and Heraklion, the landings were an unmitigated disaster. Most of the German force was wiped out or surrounded within hours.
Maleme.
The battle for Crete now came down to one single place, Maleme Airfield. Here, German gliders had landed right next to the New Zealand defenders, who were supported by a handful of Matilda tanks. This was the scene you mentioned, German paratroopers, armed only with sticky bombs and bundled grenades, suicidally charging the heavy Matilda tanks, trying to disable them. By the end of day one, Operation Mercury was a catastrophic failure. The Germans had taken horrific casualties and had failed to secure any of their objectives. General Student, in his headquarters in Athens, faced the reality that he had just thrown his entire elite corps to its death. But during the night, a single mistake changed everything. At Maleme, the Germans had managed to hold one critical piece of ground hill, 107, overlooking the airfield.
Command, do you read me? We're taking heavy...
Get off the hill! Get off the hill now!
The New Zealand battalion commander defending the airfield, his communications cut, and fearing being overrun. He'd made a fateful decision. He ordered his men to pull back from Hill 107 to form a new defensive line. When dawn broke on day 2, the surviving German paratroopers, who were themselves preparing to retreat, realized the hill was empty. They seized it immediately.
They're gone!
From Hill 107, they could now fire down onto the airfield.
Now! Begin the landings! Now!
And that was all Kurt Student needed. He made a desperate gamble, begin the landings. The pilots of the Ju-52 transports began landing their planes on the Maleme airfield while it was still under Allied artillery fire. It was chaos. Planes landed, were hit by shells, and burst into flames. Others landed right next to the wreckage. Others were destroyed as they touched down. But enough planes made it through.
Vorwärts! Schnell!
From their bellies poured thousands of fresh Gebirgsjäger mountain troops, carrying mortars, anti-tank guns, and heavy machine guns. The tide had turned. The Allied forces, now outgunned, and with no air support, were forced into a grinding retreat. The battle turned into a brutal fighting withdrawal across the harsh mountains of Crete to the southern coast, where the Royal Navy and a mini Dunkirk risked everything to save them. Germany had captured Crete. It was a strategic victory. But the cost was unimaginable. The Fallschirmjäger, the pride of Germany, was broken. Over 4,000 of its finest, most elite paratroopers were dead. Hitler was so personally shocked by the casualty lists that he concluded the day of the large-scale airborne assault was over. He personally forbade any future grand airborne operations. The Germans won the Battle of Crete, but in doing so, they lost their most feared airborne weapon. It was the victory that broke the spear.